Hey, RetconRaider here. One of the very first videos I ever did was on the creatures of Phoenix Point, but I don't think it's aged very well. I've learned a bit more about video and audio editing since then, so today I thought we'd take another look at the strange mutants we might end up facing in the final game. Much like last time, I'll put the creatures in order based on how likely I think they are to make it into the final game, starting with the ones that are already basically guaranteed to be present. I'll be covering every mutant the developers have hinted at so far, including ones I've already talked about in the past, as well as a few that I haven't had a chance to talk about yet. So this might take a while. Grab a drink, make yourself comfortable, and enjoy this gallery of mutant abominations. First, let's start with the venerable crabmen. Present in numerous pieces of concept art, screenshots, and even the pre-alpha demo, these things have already become a staple of the setting. It's probably safe to assume that these will be one of the most common rank-and-file troops of the mutant army, at least in the early game. I've talked about these things before, so I won't spend too much time on them here, but it's worth briefly revisiting the various mutations that have already been showcased on these things. First, we have the thick, crab-like carapace that can provide the crabman with extra health and armor at the cost of reduced speed. Similarly, the massive shield arm mutation also provides additional armor and health, as well as the special ability to deploy that shield, creating directional cover that makes it impossible to hit any other part of their body when attacking from that direction. Then we have the more aggressive mutations, such as massive pincers that can cripple or kill a soldier in one vicious swipe, or heavily mutated cranial structures that allow the crabman to spit globs of deadly poison. And as the Pandora virus begins overwhelming human havens, it will also begin integrating conventional military equipment into its mutants, as shown by this crabman that's sporting a machine gun on one arm and an organic grenade launcher on the other. Another mutant that's guaranteed to be in the final game is the nearly as iconic Crab Queen, which has also been showcased heavily in various pieces of promotional art and also made an appearance in the pre-alpha demo. This is the first of the massive boss creatures, mutants so powerful that it takes an entire squad to bring them down. The Crab Queen is a heavily armored killing machine, capable of using its massive claws and armored legs to inflict heavy damage on anyone who comes within her reach. As if that weren't bad enough, she can also spawn larvae, cute little critters with a nasty bite attack, and the ability to rapidly mature into bigger, deadlier mutants, providing her with near instantaneous reinforcements. Although we haven't seen it yet, she'll also be able to emit clouds of microbial mist. This mist is essentially another living organism, which allows near instantaneous communication between other Pandora virus mutants. The mist provides them with concealment, while also automatically detecting any human soldiers who enter it, and alerting nearby mutants to their presence. This mist can also be used to buff up friendly mutants, while debuffing or even infecting humans who aren't wearing proper protection. The Crab Queen is obviously a massive threat, but as a boss monster you thankfully won't be facing these things very often. Another small advantage you'll have against these things is that they're so large that any soldier can make a targeted attack against a specific part of their bodies. This will be vital when facing the larger boss monsters, because each body part you disable on these things will theoretically neutralize one of their abilities or otherwise reduce their combat effectiveness. Next, we have another boss monster, the Tidler, which, thus far, has only appeared in the convention footage and teaser material that was released last year. But the fact that it's already fully rendered and animated means it's very likely to be in the final game. The Tidler is similar in form and concept to the Crab Queen, but with a more arachnid appearance and a heavier reliance on using the microbial mist for cover. This thing will likely make use of the game's planned stealth system to sneak up on your soldiers and then crush them alive or devour them whole. A quick side note here, but this piece of concept art is horrifying, but also particularly reminiscent of the primary method of attack used by the alien body snatchers in John Carpenter's The Thing. And then we have this nightmare, which I've recently started calling the file clerk. The fact that it's already fully rendered and partially animated implies that it's going to be in the final game, and I've spent more time than I care to admit pondering over just what this thing might be. Why do I call it the file clerk? Well, for one thing, giving it such a mundane name makes it slightly less horrifying. But more importantly, I've finally decided that it's probably a combination of a human and a file clam, a strange tentacled clam that can be found in the Pacific Ocean. This mutant's whole head is a clam-like jaw, but if you look closer you'll notice that the mouth extends all the way down the thing's torso to its waist, implying that not only does its head split open when attacking, but that its whole body might be able to split open right down the middle. The arm tendrils are reminiscent of the file clam's mantle tentacles, which are primarily used for swimming and filtering food, but can also secrete a noxious substance to deter predators. So if I had to guess, and of course I do, I'd say that these things are designed to grapple and debuff your soldiers, and then swallow them whole. At least, that's how it's been happening in my nightmares. Then there's this creepy crawly. What appears to be a mutated human hand covered in asymmetrical eyeballs and dragging some sort of bloated sack behind it. This concept art was shared on the official Snapshot Games Discord channel, and the fact that it's already partially rendered implies that it will also be in the final game. Personally, I suspect that these things might be some sort of suicide bombers, creatures that leap upon your unaware soldiers before detonating whatever caustic or flammable substance is filling those sacks. Other fans have pitched the idea that those may be egg sacs, and that these things are designed to inject eggs or parasitic creatures into your soldiers. Both ideas are equally plausible, and equally horrifying. Obviously, it's hard to determine exactly where the influence for this thing might have come from. Crawling disembodied hands are a pretty common theme in many horror properties, perhaps most notably in goofier ones like The Addams Family, Evil Dead 2, and Idle Hands. But I do think it's worth noting that The Thing, the 2011 prequel, not the original, did also feature an alien hand creature, though their interpretation looked a little bit different. And then there's the behemoth, the largest mutant we've seen so far. Well, kind of. There's one creature that's potentially larger, but I'll get back to that one at the end of the video. These things have only appeared in 3 pieces of concept art, but Julian Gollop has talked about them so much that it seems all but certain they'll appear in the final game. Boss monsters are already huge, generally the size of a bus or even larger, but the behemoths take it to a whole new level. These things are the size of buildings. They're living siege engines with one sole purpose: to obliterate entire havens. When the Pandora virus detects a human settlement, these things are sent to destroy it, and the only way to stop them is apparently to airdrop onto their backs, use mini drill rigs to cut through their thick armor plating, and then use explosives or xenovenom to kill them before they can reach their target. It's hard to say what kind of creature these things might have evolved from, but this thing does have a more than passing resemblance to the massive behemoths that were briefly glimpsed at the end of Stephen King's The Mist. Now we're moving into the mutants that haven't been rendered yet, but have been sculpted by the Phoenix Point concept artists. These sculptures are used to help with the creation of 3-dimensional models for use in the game, making these creatures likely, but not guaranteed, to appear in the final game. First, we have the Medusa, a creature I've talked about before. This thing is a nightmare, though not quite as nightmarish as the file clerk. Nope, get out of here. That thing just won't leave me alone. Anyway, I've previously speculated that it's based loosely on the Cnidarian polyp, which is closely related to the Medusa jellyfish, which may be what inspired this mutant's name. Like the file clerk, this thing seems designed to grapple soldiers with its numerous arms or tendrils before strangling them or tearing them apart. If it is indeed based on the Cnidarian polyp or Medusa jellyfish, then it may also have some sort of paralytic poison. On the bright side, at least this thing doesn't look like it moves very fast. The mermaid mutant is conceptually similar to the Medusa, but differs greatly in appearance. Given its lack of legs, it again seems like it would have poor mobility, relying on its long arms to drag itself around. But its head seems to be made up of grasping hands or tendrils, possibly inspired by polyps or anemones, another type of poisonous sea life similar to the cnidarian polyps that may have inspired the Medusa. The hammerhead squid almost seems tame in comparison. Relatively speaking. It has more than its fair share of limbs, including human-like legs and arms, as well as at least 6 squid-like tentacles. Like the Medusa, this thing seems to be a close combat monster, designed to grapple its prey before tearing it apart with its shark teeth, while the human-like legs imply greater mobility and the human-like arms imply that it may be able to wield human-made weapons. But at least this one isn't likely to be poisonous. Good. I feel safer already. Now, venturing into newer territory, we have this. A sculpt of what the developers referred to as a mutant sniper. These things are based on deep sea fish, which have evolved to see in the pitch-black depths of the ocean. The mutant sniper, by extension, has a human-like body but eyes that allow it to see in the dark, making it a potentially deadly stealth unit in nocturnal battles. Although we can't see its entire body, it does seem to have a predominantly humanoid build and a particularly gaunt frame. That implies it's likely these things are the mutant equivalent of the conventional sniper class. Stealthy, deadly at long range, but comparatively fragile. And finally we have this delightful snake mutant. The segmented legs are from an aquatic arthropod, and the snake itself is likely based upon one of the many species of coral or sea snakes found in coastal regions. From an inspiration standpoint, it seems fairly obvious that these were inspired by the snake men featured in the original XCOM title. And, sadly, they're far less appealing than XCOM 2's Snake Waifu. Theoretically anyway. This is the internet we're talking about. Hastily moving on, we're now entering the realm of creatures that only exist as concept art, no sculptures or renders. That's not to say that they won't still be in the final game, but it does mean that they're just as likely to end up on the cutting room floor. Perhaps the most likely to make it into the game is this thing, a heavily mutated human that, for the sake of simplicity, I generally refer to as the Stalker. Like the crabmen, this concept art shows multiple possible mutations ranging from the Miststalker configuration, which is likely a stealthy melee unit, to the more straightforward brawler and the deadlier, long-ranged shielded gunner. Perhaps the most notable thing about these mutants is that, while most of the other mutants with humanoid features appear to be hybrids, these things appear to be humans that have been implanted with something that is changing their bodies from the inside out. Unlike all of the other mutants, these things are also obviously wearing conventional military gear, perhaps implying that they're the remnants of captured human soldiers. And one thing that all 3 variants have in common is the tentacle thing that seems to be bulging out of their fractured skulls. Julian Gollop previously stated that there would be something in the game conceptually similar to the chrysalids from the original XCOM, which could implant humans with an egg or parasite that would turn them into a zombie-like monster. This concept was echoed in Alan Stroud's short story Soul Stealer, which features a human having his heart removed and replaced with a parasitic creature that keeps him alive while simultaneously feeding on him and repurposing his flesh. It's possible that both Gollop and Stroud were referring to this thing, the Stalker. But just to reinforce my theory a bit, I couldn't help but note some physical similarities between these things and the original chrysalid from UFO Defense. Note the digitigrade legs on the Miststalker design, similar to the legs of the chrysalid. Likewise, notice the distinctive 2-clawed arm on the brawler. Again, very similar to the original chrysalid design. Coincidence? Perhaps. But still worth note. And speaking of human-like mutants, we have these 2 things, the Gunner mutant and the Mech mutant. I previously treated these as 2 separate entities, but on closer inspection it's evident that they have very similar body structures, especially around the metal collarbone and the protruding metal ribs. Could it be that these things are two possible evolutionary routes for the same creature? Or is this thing the Phoenix Point equivalent of a Terminator, organic on the outside but cybernetic beneath? Perhaps this thing is actually a monstrous ally, made using some unholy fusion of New Jericho's cybernetics and the disciple of Anu's mastery of mutations. After all, the living alien weapons seem to be proof that at least some human factions have been experimenting with repurposing the Pandora virus, using it to bioengineer their own weaponized mutants. This thing is another human-based mutant, a conglomeration of body parts that looks like something taken straight out of Silent Hill. It only appears in a single piece of concept art, which is labeled as The Pianist, a mind controller concept. Based on its design, it will be physically frail, but any mind-controlling opponent can be a potential game-changer on the battlefield. And next we have man's best friend, the dog. Or at least whatever a dog becomes after it's infected with the Pandora virus. There are 3 separate pieces of concept art for this thing, each one taking a distinctly different approach with its mutated body structure, but the one thing that all 3 designs have in common is that they all bear a passing resemblance to the things from John Carpenter's The Thing, most notably the Kennel Thing and the Blair Thing. Another potential boss monster is shown in this piece of concept art. This thing is labeled as the Worm, and if it ends up being included in the final game, then the shoulder-mounted missile launchers imply it may be one of the most deadly ranged threats the player can end up facing. Given its sheer mass and heavy firepower, this could very well end up being the mutant equivalent of an anti-vehicular weapons platform, perhaps intended to shoot down your airships. This unnamed mutant is much tamer in comparison, but it appears to have a somewhat similar mouth structure to the worm, perhaps implying that it may be the worm at a much earlier stage in its unnatural evolution. Or, as I've theorized in the past, it may be a more mature larva, in an interim stage between larvae and something larger. And speaking of larger, we of course have the Fat one of the earliest pieces of concept art released for Phoenix Point. This thing appears to be a slow but sturdy mutant, and the original teaser blurb states that its bloated belly is filled with smaller mutants, perhaps the same larvae that the Crab Queen can spawn. The only earlier piece of concept art was this thing. It was never named, but I previously theorized that it might be based on the mantis shrimp. There have been no signs that it's going to be in the game thus far, but it's easy to see the elements of its design that have been worked into some of the other mutants. And then there's this thing, one of the only 2 mutant concepts to be completely uncolored. This piece of concept art has only appeared in an early IGN article, and although it bears a slight resemblance to some of the other mutants, it is distinctly different enough in both appearance and art style that I have to wonder if it's even intended to be concept art for Phoenix Point. And, what's with the little girl? Actually, on second thought, I'd rather not know. That brings us to our final, roughest piece of concept art, a black and white piece portraying some sort of flying thing. This picture gives us no real sense of scale, but Julian Gollop has previously stated that one of the mutants will be a swarm of flying things that can only be efficiently dispatched with area attack weapons such as flamethrowers. But then again, he's also implied that there might be giant mutant bats in the final game. So perhaps this thing is a single tremendous flying mutant, designed to bring down your transports later in the game. Either way, this mutant is notable for being the only one we've seen so far that can fly. Julian Gollop has stated that the alien horde won't have access to flying units at the beginning of the campaign, but has hinted that this will change as the campaign progresses. And that brings us up to date with the latest mutant designs that have been teased by Snapshot Games and their various concept artists. It's worth noting that the vast majority of these mutants are obviously based on aquatic creatures, but Julian Gollop has previously stated that the Pandora virus will also begin mutating land-based creatures as the campaign advances. Aside from the dog and some unfortunate humans, they're keeping those land-based mutant designs a secret for now. But Gollop has mentioned numerous mutant animals he'd like to include, such as giant insects, chameleons with wings, elephants, lions, and giraffes. And it's also been implied that land-based plant life may end up mutating as well. Now, before we wrap things up, there is one more thing that's worth briefly addressing. I previously mentioned that there's one thing larger than the behemoth, and that would be this thing. I previously speculated that the Pandora virus itself has a grand central bulk made up of fungal growth and tendrils. This is a theory that has been reinforced by stories such as The Claimed Idol and Hafgufu, both of which featured some massive but largely unseen creature which sported giant fungal tendrils. So, could this be our first glimpse at the Pandora virus's true form? I guess we'll just have to wait and see. And on that note, this is RetconRaider, signing off. Thanks for listening, and pleasant dreams. Oh, and remember, although I do love talking about Phoenix Point, you can find out all the latest news by visiting the official website and the crowdfunding campaign page over on Fig. Links are in the description.